you very much to all three of our speakers. We will start Q&A right now. What we normally do is take several rounds of questions, and we also take into account our virtual audience. So I'll start here in the room. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand, identify yourself. If the question is to a specific speaker, let us know, and we'll start passing a mic around to you. So.
Thank you so much. It's extremely informative and interesting. My question is, how important is water desalination for food, generally speaking, but is water desalination technology a barrier? It is desperately needed. What would happen if we had tomorrow the technology?
Thank you. I'll just collect a group. Desalinization. I'll collect a couple more questions, and then we'll let the panelists answer. David.
Thank you, David Lambert. Thank you very much. Could you please give some perspective on the debate on genetics? It seems that the more progress that is made on traits with disease, with drought, with nutrition, with all the rest, paradoxically, the controversy seems to be intensifying. And it perhaps is not based on science. Could you give some perspective on that, please?
Okay, one more question this round. Keith.
Howdy, Buis from Harvest Plus. About, I don't know, 20 years ago, there was a big debate at the Centers Weeks about whether whether the CGIAR should get involved in climate change. We should just be increasing production. Should we also worry about climate change? And you know, fortunately, the people that argued we should be involved in climate change won out, and you can see the tremendous advances that IRRI's made that Bob talked about. I think we've been less successful in terms of let's also include nutrition in the debate and in our activities. So Bob, it was all you know, it's tremendous successes: supply, supply, supply. But when you go to the centers and you even ask what's the per capita consumption of your crop in various countries by income group, there isn't any information. So in Bangladesh, 75% of calories in rural areas come from rice. You don't talk about the quality of that rice and what you're doing in terms of the science of worrying about the quality of the rice. I think that's my main question. Second question is really related to when you have these new technologies, how much does the CG get involved in trying to get the adoption of the varieties in the countries? I know that with our high iron beans in Rwanda, we're really benefiting from this great germplasm that CIAT developed. Our beans are higher yielding, but we're spending between $1 and $2 million a year to multiply seed and get it out there, and that's why there's adoption now, whereas that wasn't happening before.
Okay, so we have three questions. The first on water desalinization, the second on genetics, and the two-part third question on nutritional quality of rice, and then CGIAR involvement in adoption. So why don't we kick it off with Bob, if you'd like to tackle any of those three?
Just give a shot on each of the three. Desalinization for very, very high value crops, vegetables, etc., in very water short areas is a conceivable approach. I think that there's nothing on the horizon that tells us that desalinization will be a major game changer in water availability in water short areas. Having said that, we are working actively to develop crops that tolerate higher levels of salinity in coastal areas, et cetera. So I think there are a number of ways to address the issue of salt in the water, be it groundwater, be it coastal supplies, et cetera. In terms of genetics, yes, the polemics, the temperature of the so-called debate, it's not really a debate, it's a shouting match, where half the side shouts that GMOs will kill you and the other side scratches its head and saying, why do you say that? And don't get an answer. In terms of genetic engineering, GMOs, et cetera, I've concluded that not only is the jury not out anymore about whether are safe and beneficial. The jury has rendered its verdict. Yes, they are safe and beneficial. And the jury has gone home, but people are still shouting outside the courthouse, complaining that there's a problem. There's zero evidence anywhere, credible evidence, that there's anything intrinsically risky about the GMO technology. When I say intrinsically, I mean that is specifically a risk associated with GMOs as opposed to any other agricultural technology. Every technology has concerns, but there's nothing inherent in there. So from the scientific community, it's clear. Hopefully the policy people are paying more attention to scientists. Can always hope. But I think that it's an emotional, ideological issue rather than a technical issue. In terms of nutritional quality, we are actually paying more and more attention to that. Howdy, you're right, that we've been a little bit slow to pick up on it, but I think in some ways the tools we have now enable us to make more progress than we could have 10 or 15, 20 years ago. We didn't have the ability. And you can have aspirations without ability. Now we have the capacity, and we're paying a lot of attention to it. In addition to the micronutrients that you're so familiar with, we're looking at issues around, case for rice, low glycemic index related to type 2 diabetes, et cetera. So very much on our radar screen. And I want to just salute you for when it was not a popular issue, bringing it up. And I first heard one of your colleagues in '92 in Erie talking about this, and I thought this was really spot on, and you guys stuck with it, which is very impressive. Adoption, we are finding ourselves more and more involved in seed systems. I was at USAID this morning talking specifically about that. And because the basic seed delivery system in most countries that we're targeting are not functioning very well. And so we find that we have to get ourselves involved. What we don't want to do is have our very, very highly trained scientists in particular disciplinary areas multiplying seed. What we need to do is be putting our minds behind how we can rejuvenate seed sectors, and I think the private, small, medium-sized seed companies are going to be the way to go in that. So,
Thanks. Rob?
Thank you, Gwendolyn. The United States, and therefore USAID, is somewhat uniquely positioned around biotechnology amongst development agencies. Two reasons for that. One is the scientific capacity of this country, both public and private. But the second, which is really where the uniqueness comes in, is the political space to do this. There are many other development agencies that understand the value of doing this, but they don't have the political freedom to pursue it. Sometimes those can lead to good programs and things like biosafety, capacity building. On the other hand, to be brutally frank, some of those biosafety capacity building efforts have pointed towards systems that were never going to be functional because they were such a strict liability sort of framework. So they weren't really based on functional. So how have we handled this? USAID, and again, we've had a great position in the U.S. government as well. You know, state is very much about the diplomacy. USDA, a lot about the trade and getting markets open. Foreign Ag Service takes this issue very seriously. It's important to us at AID and at USDA for food aid. Who can remember when the food aid was locked up in Zambia in a warehouse because it was GM and people were starving, and thank God the people broke in and got the maize or the corn soy blender, whatever it happened to have been. So, but AID takes a dual approach. First of all, we're demand driven. A country has to want it. It's got to be a technology that is for the smallholder, filling a gap that's not necessarily going to be met through traditional means, and then pairing with that capacity building so that they can make sound science-based decisions. So we don't push it, but we try to be the best partner we can be. Now, Dave commented that, you know, this is one of these things that feels like the harder we try, the further deep we sink. And I felt like that many times. But during this past year, Bangladesh has released a BT eggplant. Eggplant is a very nutritious vegetable. It's the most important vegetable in South Asia. It is sprayed anywhere from 80 to 100 times in a 3-month, 4-month growing season for shoot and fruit borer. You have to spray it constantly. We now have this variety out that does not require the spray, that has the same targeted molecule that you get when you buy organic groceries here in the United States. Those have been sprayed with the same naturally occurring pesticide that's safe for animals. And so that's kind of a victory. It's the first food crop in South Asia. But anyway, I remain fairly bullish partly based on the daunting nature of the challenges we face. We're not going to be able to turn our back on science. Prabhu Pingali, who many of you know, worked at FAO 13 years ago and put out a fantastic report saying the world can't afford not to pay attention to science in agriculture and food security. Still recommend it. Finally, I know I went on a bit long there, Gwendolyn. The adoption piece, nutrition, sea change for me. I mean, it used to be nutrition and agriculture, different camps. We're really together now in AID. I think it's fantastic, Howdy. I think we got some work to go still with the WASH people. We don't have as close a tie, but it's been fantastic. And as I said earlier, it's the reason we get funded. People care about people, the Congress. Adoption, we're part of if you want to call it a problem on that, we're pushing these guys to get their materials out. And we do it to IFPRI too, although it looks a little different in that case. What we talk about sometimes is responsibility but not accountability. In other words, we want our research partners to have a vision that shows a pathway for impact, and then we want them to think about how to make catalytic partnerships to drive that. But we don't want them to become extension agents. But we do think that they have a very important role to play, and sometimes the poorer the country, the more important the role. We're very much into this right now with Feed the Future and trying to move research outcomes into scale. At scale is the word used nowadays. We're going to try to learn. We're going to try to do no harm to seed systems. We've tried to pull in seed system advisors to advise us every step of the way so that we don't undercut nascent seed systems, some of which are formal, some of which are informal, all of which are important. So we're still learning. I would last point on that is I think the system could be more mindful and analytical about this than we are. So.
Thanks, Rob. Schengen?
Well, on water issues, I think probably we should pay more attention to efficiency of the current water use, and also to think of recycle of some of the wasted water from the urban centers. Probably more gain from that. And we also have some good news about so-called GMO. You guys don't want to mention that magic word. In Africa, that IFPRI and the African Development Bank just launched a book, or is going to launch a book, a joint publication, about the potential benefits and certain policy changes in using GMO for their food and nutrition security in Africa. So the African Development Bank president and myself, so we're jointly launching that publication co-authored by some of the IFPRI staff, Judy Chamber and many others. Now, adoption. I think we should choose adoption as a research topic as well. Why certain technologies have not been adopted and others have. And do some experiments. So instead of we do the large scale push for adoption, maybe we can do the experiments to demonstration of how this can work and build the strong partners who can help us to deliver, to move to adoption, probably the more effective way for the CGIAR to move to adoption.
Thank you, Shengen. So now we'll start with the second round of questions. First over here, and then I also saw over here. So Keith.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. Is that okay? All right. I'm Kitty Cardwell with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture at the USDA. And NIFA is the USDA extramural research funding organ. And we have research grants for all kinds of ag categories, technology primarily. But it occurred to me today that we don't have anything for policy, for ag policy. And so our land-grant university partners, I mean, most of us come from a technical field. Bob and I both used to be microscope rats. I mean, we all start somewhere in the technology, not in policy development. So I would like to know, probably from you, Dr. Fenn, what kind of training is needed for future food and ag policy research and development specialists? What would they need to know? And my second question, this is going to be a little bit of a needle, Bob. Your map showed that rice and poverty overlap, literally, almost correlated there. What's going wrong, and what policies are needed there to turn that around?
Thank you.
Will Martin from World Bank. Question for Bob Ziegler. Bob, you outlined a very exciting green revolution in Africa. You have the enormous expansion of production and consumption in Africa, but you didn't tell us very much about how we're going to get there, how to overcome all the problems that have resulted in there not being a green revolution in Africa to date. Now, I wonder if you could give us a little more detail of your vision there.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with those technically 3 questions. So the first one on training for food and ag policy, the second one on the rice and poverty overlap, directed specifically to Bob, and also on green revolution in Africa. And this time we'll start off with Shengen on the ag and food policy.
Okay. Well, here in the U.S., there are capacities in doing policy. Yes, yeah. Much focused on domestic ag policy. The USAID is planning to set up some sort of policy innovation.
Already, it exists, yeah.
Yes, it's already existing. Probably that needs to be training to the policy. I think my personal working silos, even economists and policy analysts. Environment technology division, we're just focus on technologies or environment. Then nutrition, just nutrition, trade. So we never try to present a holistic approach to policymakers, let's say in India, China, or Africa, because the African leaders wanted to hear a coherent, integrated strategy. Look at the nutrition angle, hunger, this undernourishment, poverty, employment. So all this have to be integrated instead of in silos. And instead of more PhDs, which probably still very much required, I think more master degrees to integrate all this together on public policy or international development programs in the Nangguan University. By the way, Nangguan universities also have pretty strong analytical capacity in policy issues. It's just a question how we can really bring them together to train the next generation of policy analysts who can integrate all this together. So the world has changed, so must of our training.
Thank you. Rob, do you want to comment on policy? And yeah.
It is something we actually take very seriously. It's one of the it was one of the areas we didn't build up as quickly in Feed the Future as we should have, but we've been playing catch-up ball, and I think doing that very well. We have a whole team led by Jeff Hill. There's a new partnership with IFPRI and Michigan State, in addition to the CGIAR's own programs on policy and markets. But as I understand it, and also Kitty, the ERS is an important partner in that, as Schengen mentioned. But it's about building analytical capacity. It's also about implementing policy, and that's a little bit newer, to have more focus on implementing policy. And then the third leg of the stool is something called a mutual accountability framework. So it really is more of a higher level commitment. Policy features very strongly in the new Alliance for Africa. That's the partnership between the AU and the G8. So, and as I mentioned in my talk, we see it as just critical. And we greatly, greatly value the work of our partners like IFPRI, Michigan State, and others who build that capacity so that countries, just as I mentioned building it for science-based regulatory, probably even more important to do it for sound economic policy and agricultural policy and everything from input markets to output markets to trade.
Thanks, Rob. And as we're close to the end of our time, I'll let Bob take us out with the last two questions. Thank you, Bob.
Actually, I have to catch a train, so I'll be leaving right now. So.
Yikes.
No, okay. Exactly. Thank you, Kitty.
Not funny, Bob.
Just a quick word on policy. I would like to see our policymakers be well grounded in science and technology to make informed decisions. So not only do we need to make sure we're turning out good people who can make good policies, they need to understand what they're talking about. When I had my last vestige of influence over my daughter, who was majoring in economics, I said, you must take a course in chemistry, biology, and physics before you graduate. She still holds it against me, but I figured if you're going to be a policymaker, you used to have some grounding in the natural sciences. Right. But in terms of the distribution of poverty, well, that's where the people are, and you know the relationship of rice and poverty. I always do wonder why, if people are going to say, is rice making people poor? I would say really what it does is it provides enough energy and food so that people can reproduce, and that you get a lot of people where rice is grown. But that doesn't, you know, it really begs the question what Howdy was talking about. When you are eating a lot of your basic staples, and in this case rice, and you move away from your more nutritious foods, Bangladesh, in terms of moving away from fish and vegetables, that's a very bad direction to be going in. So I think that when we look at the poverty issue and the concentration of poverty where rice is going, rice isn't going to pull people out of poverty. And more rice is not going to make people better fed. I want to make sure we understand that. We do have to pay attention to, you know, what are the determinants of poverty. But I will tell you that if you are starving and you are hungry and you don't have enough calories, you will not pull yourself out of poverty. So it's you know, I look at rice as an enabler, and that moves right into the question around the green revolution in Africa. And I'm going to differ a little bit from Rob here, where and agree with Schengen around the small is beautiful. I think if we focus on smallholder agriculture exclusively, we're going to be guiding our policy by looking in the rearview mirror. I don't think the future of rural growth and development in sub-Saharan Africa is going to be determined by a woman with a hoe and a baby on her back, scratching out a life on 1/10 of a hectare. There's going to be major transformations in the rural sector in Africa, and those transformations will enable a much more effective taking up of new technologies that we're talking about. Population density, land availability, water availability in Africa, and population distribution all argue for a major transformation in agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. And if we run away from that and hide our heads and say, oh, no, we can't think about expanding farm sizes, or we can't think about urbanization. Well, let's not think about it, but it's still going to happen. And we need to be in front of the curve, in my opinion. But that is just my opinion.
And Rob wants to jump right in.
Yeah, because it's very important, and I fully agree with what Bob just said. When I talked about smallholder, I was also talking about figuring out ways to aggregate. In other words, maybe not aggravate. Maybe we have to find ways for people, if they have tenure, to rent their land. If there's service providers that can service an entire village with some sort of mechanization that individual farmers can't afford. That's what I was trying to get at. But our key, the worst case scenario that we hear about is a sovereign wealth fund coming in and pushing 50,000 people off their land. And I know that's not what Bob is talking about. But it's not that we don't believe this transformation and aggregation is going to occur. The worrisome thing is that the opposite is occurring, that holdings are getting smaller and smaller in parts. At the large tail, it's going up. In Asia, farm size is rising. In Africa, it's still going down, and that's a problem because it prevents the kinds of intensification that need to occur. Finally, just to underscore Bob's point about and the question about poverty, I didn't explain it, but in the map I was showing on sustainable intensification, we found that when we mapped poverty and stunting, it maps beautifully to the most productive agricultural regions of the world, which are also the most densely populated. So we have 4 areas in Feed the Future. We have the Indo-Gangetic Plains, we have the Ethiopian highlands, the mid-elevation mixed maize-based systems that run from Kenya close to South Africa, and then the Sudano-Sahelian zone. So those are exactly the areas of potential. But they're also where the people are, as Bob said, and they are unfortunately where the poverty is. But it underscores the relevance of agriculture and the agricultural transformation that was just mentioned as being the way out for those folks.
Thanks, Rob. And just one last final thing. Schengen, do you want to close us out with a word or two, jump in on this discussion at all? Or?
Well, Bob,
Bob, however.
Yeah, I think the world has changed, the climate has changed, or will continue to change. So our policy research, our innovations have to be dynamic, have to address all these changing environments or ever-changing environments. So it has to be dynamic. So any central plan, including research plan, we are in a process of developing CGI research strategy. Make sure that new strategy is dynamic, not top-down, not central planning. I have experienced that. It does not work. So more decentralized, addressing to the dynamic changes will be more innovative.
Thank you. So with that, I'll end the seminar.